Hello and welcome to our workshop for Composable Commerce on Salesforce B2C Commerce. My name is Fua Khalid and this is our second episode for our workshop series that we're creating for Composable Commerce. If you haven't checked out the first episode, then please head over and view that first, where I talked about a basic setup of MRT and our PWA kit, and I set up that storefront and had it running. Today I'll be picking up from there, and the next topic that we're going to discuss today is looking more into managed runtime, what it offers and how it improves performance, and PWA Kit out-of-the-box functionalities or things that are just interesting to know. So to start, this is the content that we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about caching in CDN, what it is, how it works in PWA Kit, how MRT utilizes edge servers. We're going to talk about the impact on SEO when we're shifting to Composable, or what the impact of using a phased rollout is. We're going to talk about how we can check logs, especially with our decoupled storefront, where we have a decoupled front end and back end. And finally, we're going to have a quick exercise where we talk about, or we go through how Page Designer works with PWA Kit and how we can use the preview functionality that is offered in MRT. So jumping right in, before we actually talk about each of those terms that I discussed, I just want to go over a flow that shows the flow of data basically after a user makes a request. So let's suppose you have a user browsing the website and they make a request. They land on the PLP, they click on a product, and they are headed over to the product page. So what actually happens at the back end? Where does that data come from? And what are those things that set Composable apart from legacy architectures and make it so much faster? So the first thing that happens after a user makes a request is that a service worker interprets that request. So a service worker, I'll talk more about exactly what a service worker is, but for now, let's just think of it as a middle agent that interprets that request and decides what to do with it. So your service worker does have a cache available in your device. It does cache some information. Sometimes the request that the user makes can already be available with the service worker. And if it is fresh, if it hasn't expired, that service worker is just going to simply provide that data back to the user instantly and display the page. Given that the fresh data does not exist, given that this data has gone stale, the request then continues and goes over, and a DNS lookup is basically conducted, which hits the nearest CDN Edge Node, of which is something that comes with MRT, and checks if there is a fresh cache available there. So another difference over here between SFRA, Site Genesis, and Composable is that SFRA and Site Genesis used to have a origin SFCC caching strategy. And over here we have Edge Node caching, CDN Edge Node. So the difference mainly is that SFCC origin caching would be a single centralized server that is powered by Salesforce itself, that all those requests are redirected to the SFCC origin, where it then returns data. And because that server could be really far from where the request is being generated, it could possibly take some time to get a response, to send that data, to send that request and to get a response. The difference over here with CDN Edge Nodes is that they are globally distributed around the world, and whenever a user makes a request, based on their geolocation, the CDN Edge Node closest in their proximity is the one that's going to receive that request, and it's going to check its cache to see if it has fresh cache to respond to that user's request. So instead of making a full call to the origin server, it just makes a call to that CDN Edge Node, which has its own cache, and if it does have some fresh cache available, it's going to return a response, which again is going to reduce time, and the page is going to be loaded. So these are two tiers of caching that are already implemented. After this, if the Edge Node also does not have fresh data available, then the request is taken to the MRT app server, which then processes that request and sees where to route it. This is another thing that is different between SFRA, Site Genesis, and Composable, is that SFRA and Site Genesis would generally have to route that request to SFCC, and that SFCC server through a controller or any service that is set up in that code base would then make the API call, get the data, and then return it to the requester. In this case, MRT app server, basically, it can route that request directly to the third party. So for example, we have a third party CMS that we've integrated into our storefront, and we want to get some data about some content data, some images or something for the homepage. And the MRT app server receives that request. Instead of going to SFCC, running a controller, and using a server from that, a service call from that to make an API request, it's directly going to hit that third party using the exposed API and retrieve data from there and then return it to the end user. So this is, again, something that really, really improves performance and something that sets Composable apart from the other architectures. When that data is returned, whether it's coming from the SFCC server or it's coming from a third party, it goes back to the original requester and an SSR page is loaded. So this is something that we're going to talk more in detail in the SEO section. This is something that improves SEO, is that you do have server-side rendering, which basically provides an HTML of the response that you're getting, simultaneously to the rest of the more animated page. Whenever that request is received, the CDN Edge Node then receives it. So the CDN Edge Node in closest proximity to the user making the request, it receives that data, it caches it with itself, and then the data goes to the service worker, which interprets it and caches it with itself, and then the page is displayed. So the next time, if you refresh that page after half an hour, the first thing that's going to happen is that service worker is already going to have that cache available. So it's just going to provide that page directly to the user. So we keep talking about a service worker. Let's talk about what a service worker is. So service workers, essentially, they're just scripts that run on the back end of your device, and they act as a middle layer that intercepts the request that is generated from the user. And instead of completing that request, or instead of that request going directly to the server, the service worker first interprets that request and checks to see if it's required for that request to go all the way to the server, or does it have a fresh response available that it can just return to the user right away. So that is what the service worker does, and it acts as a proxy. There are different benefits of a service worker that we can get into after we discuss the two caching strategies that it uses. So there are two caching strategies that a service worker uses. The first is pre-caching and the second is runtime caching. Pre-caching is where, as soon as you visit the site, the service worker is going to cache some static data or some data that is not very frequently changed, which it considers to be able to be cached and improve performance, basically. So you have pre-caching, which is basically just assets, things that don't frequently change a lot. So in this, you can have contact us page, you can have FAQs page, you can have some images and stuff that, or some banners that don't really frequently change, but they do need to be gotten from the server. So it caches all of that information first. And then as you browse different pages, it also performs runtime caching. So let's suppose if you land on a product page, for example, maybe the images or the color swatches or the information that the product details and everything, maybe that could be stuff that the service worker thinks, I can pre-cache this. I can already have that available. And when you visit the product page, those would kind of instantly show up. But the other information that is constantly changing, that is more runtime information, like the product prices, is there any discount on it or not? What is the inventory level of this right now? Those are things that it would on the runtime cache just for a little time, so that if you instantly refresh the page for maybe 60 seconds later or a couple of minutes later, it would just provide that same information to you. And runtime caching is more focused on providing a very stable user experience to users, because it ensures that even if your device goes offline, if you have an unstable network and you're constantly going offline online, instead of constantly throwing you an error, or instead of like just getting stuck on loading, it just keeps some things cached and ensures that the user at the end does not know that there is some sort of fluctuation on their network. So pre-caching is more focused on improving the page speed, and runtime caching is more focused on ensuring that there is a seamless experience even when there is trouble with the network. So next, we're going to talk about MRT, CDN, and Edge services. These actually come with the entire package that is provided from Salesforce for Composable. So this is something that is provided out of the box, and they do enhance the user experience because they will, obviously, if you have edge nodes that are caching information that are returning information or that are returning cached information based on your geolocation, it would obviously increase your performance of the website. There are some other strategies that can be implemented to improve cache hit ratios. These are things that those who are in development would obviously know about, but I'll just go over a couple of points. For example, you want to set optimal cache lifetimes for different HTTP requests. You want to ensure that you're performing conditional rendering. We can get into conditional rendering. It's also discussed later on. And then you're also filtering query strings. There is the option of customizing cache as well that is available in PWA Kit, so which is similar to what we had in SFR and Site Genesis. Next, let's talk about what comes out of the box with caching. So one other thing that happens on the server side, this also occurs out of the box, is that the SCAPI requests that are, especially the GET requests that belong to different API families, those are also cached on the server side. So you might think that every time you make a request, like every time, for example, you make a request to get a product, would that go all the way till the end server to get that information for you? Or is that response kind of cached somewhere? So it is cached, and this is something that is implemented on the server side to ensure that you get a very fast response without actually having to perform a lookup for a specific product, for example. There are different rules over here that are used to ensure that the cache expires at an appropriate time, or that whether it's personalized or not. So if we talk about the expiration of any response of an API GET request is based on the least amount of time, the least amount of lifetime that any expansion pack in that API response has. So for example, if we have a request to get a product and that product has an availability expansion pack in it, availability expansion packs generally have a 60-second default expiration time. So whether you have, even if you have something else, another expansion pack in that response that has a validity for, let's say, 5 days, but still the entire response would expire after 60 seconds because that is the least amount of lifetime that you have within that API response. So again, in this case, if you had an availability expansion pack and then you have some other expansion pack, like the product name, for example, that has an expiration of maybe a couple of months, but your API response would expire after 60 seconds based on the availability expansion pack. Anyway, moving on, this is how to customize cache. So this is very similar to SFR and Site Genesis. You can use cache control. This is what the code looks like. If you want to run this on your end, I've added a snippet of code over here just so you can use it for reference. So if you want to perform this a small exercise on your end, you can do that as well, where you can set cache control and set a max age for it. You can also use this. This is another syntax to expire any specific component. You can use you need to use the date now, the current time, and then you're going to add the time after which you want it to expire, and you have to use the time in milliseconds. And based on that, basically, you would be able to decide when to expire a script API. If you want to test your response, one way you can do is through your network tab. So on any web browser that you're using DevTools, you can simply check your networks tab and look against a network call to see if the cache is implemented or not. And another way is for you to use a curl command in your terminal to output all of the response headers. Besides that, you do need to ensure when you're customizing your cache that you do carry out conditional rendering. Obviously, on the server side, you do need to be careful about the type of information that you're caching. You don't want to cache any personal information, like that would be specific to a user, anything like their name, the number of items that they have in their cart, their address, or the payment methods that they've selected as preferred payment methods. And you also don't want to cache any information that is frequently changing. So you don't want to cache promotions or inventory data. All of that stuff will not be cached on the server side. So you will have to implement some conditional rendering to ensure that those are not cached. So coming next to SEO, this again is a very frequent question. It's a very common question that we get whenever anybody is introduced to Composable, because those of us who are familiar with React-based storefronts, we do know that there is a concept of server-side and client-side rendering, which affects your SEO a lot, because your client-side rendering would take some time to render. It's something that not all bots can carry out, but your server-side rendering provides HTML that is very easily accessible to crawlers, and it's very quick for them to filter out any keywords that you've put in for SEO. So first of all, to answer that, unlike other typical websites that are based on React, the PWA kit does come with support for SSR. So you do have server-side rendering available in PWA Kit, and it does provide an HTML instantaneously. As soon as you make a request, the response HTML is provided from the SSR, which is completely separate from the CSR rendering. So it happens asynchronously, they're not dependent on each other. And that HTML is provided for the sole purpose to provide bots and crawlers enough information to understand what the contents of the page are. There are other features of PWA Kit that actually improve SEO. So if you compare the SEO of PWA Kit, given that you followed all the best practices, it would be relatively a lot better than the SEO of Safari and Site Genesis. And some of those features, for those again who are familiar with SEO, you know that the performance of your site, how fast your pages are loading, how mobile friendly it is, how responsive your design is, how secure your site is, are you using HTTPS or not? All of these factors contribute to ensuring that your SEO is as best as possible. And you also have a robot.txt file, which is specific for crawlers to ensure that they're going on the right routes. There are other factors, again, over here as well. You do have some factors during development that you need to take care of to make sure that your SEO is as good as possible. Those include using canonical URLs, using content optimization, and continuously auditing your SEO to make sure that it's working as per your expectations or as per your requirements. When we do move to Composable, there are some complications that might arise based on the implementation that you have. So we are familiar, as I discussed earlier, that we have the concept of a hybrid or a phased rollout in Composable, which actually uses a reverse proxy. A reverse proxy is a very tricky thing when you're talking about SEO, because you need to make sure that all of your configurations are completely correct, or the reverse proxy could kind of fire back and completely destroy the SEO of your site. There are a lot of development strategies that you need to take care of. There are a lot of common mistakes that people make, which really affects the SEO of their site. Some of those are noted them down over here. There's incorrect CDN caching. So you might, you might be caching outdated pages, which are blocking the crawlers from being able to access your site properly. You might have staging URLs or test environment URLs that are configured in your or indexed. Your canonical tags might be duplicated. There might be incorrect rankings, so the crawlers can't decide or understand which URL to be redirected to. And having slow page loads. So anything, again, incomposable, because you do have more power, but you do have more responsibility on you now as well. So you do have the ability to join blocks together, but that could adversely affect you if you're not a good developer, you haven't followed good practices in development, and it might result in slow pages, which would negatively impact your SEO. So these are some ways that you can actually address those complications. So the first thing you can do is set correct cache rules and forward the SEO headers. You can block staging URLs from indexing to make sure that test environments are not indexed. Make sure that all of your canonical tags are working the way that they should. Test it continuously. You should be auditing it, and you should be doing this on the live site, not on test environments. So you want to test your SEO on your actual live site. And you want to set up proper redirects and basically follow all of the best practices that are generally used for SEO. Finally, let's talk about the logging and error detection. Again, we have a decoupled storefront in PWA Kit because we're following the headless architecture. So this is a common question again that arises, is it difficult to debug problems that arise on the storefront because you're not really sure where to go look for the answers, or are you still going to be using the log center or not? So there are two types of logging that you're going to have to take care of. One is client side and one is server side. And again, because we're completely on a headless architecture, so the client side logging would be separate from the server side. For server side, this includes your SCAPI, CAPI calls. This is all still going to be tracked in your business manager logs, the way that we've been using previously for SFR and Site Genesis. You do have an X correlation ID. This can help you identify which requests are generating which logs. And another way for you to generate SSR logs is to tail logs through the CLI or command prompt. You do need to have developer or admin access for this. And for client side, you can put in logs. So whenever you're implementing anything on the client side, you need to ensure that you have proper error catching methods. So you want to make sure that you have exceptional handling carried out, and you do have logs written on different areas where you think that the code could potentially break, so that it's easier for you to identify the areas where this is happening. That's it for our discussion on MRT, and we're just going to wrap this up with a quick exercise where I'll show you how Page Designer is working and how the preview functionality can be set up on MRT and what it looks like. So let's go ahead and log into here. So I did set this up myself before, and we're going to use this code that I've already deployed. And there's nothing special in this code. It's simply out of the box. It's the latest version. So if you follow the tutorial that we had in the previous episode, you would have a PWA kit running, and I'm just going to show you how to set up your preview functionality so that it works based off of that, given that you've started from there. For the page designer, so for Page Designer, if you're using non-extensible, then you're going to have Page Designer available out of the box. And if you don't have it, if you only have extensible, you can basically get that folder from the non-extendable code for Page Designer and set up a page viewer page, which would basically route you to the components required for getting your Page Designer. You do need to design some of the components. So out of the box, I think you only have 2 or 3 available, maybe an image tile or text boxes. But besides that, if you want to use anything more customized, if you want to use like sliders or something, then you will have to write code for that. So this is what my Page Designer page looks like. And if I head over here and I click on, let's preview the site. All right, before I actually show you the preview functionality, I do want to show you what the things that you need to set up from here are. So this, you can see these are the different rules I have. You can ignore the hybrid ones. you can ignore these ones, but the rest of them, as we discussed in the previous call, the client secret is going to be the same as the same way that you generated this client ID, except that you're going to select the private client to be true, and it's going to generate a private client ID and a secret for you, which you're going to put in over here. Private client ID, private client secret. You want to name it the same way I've named it over here, and you can simply add variable, name it, and store your different variables on your in your environment variables for your specific environment. Once you've done that, you want to check the scopes of your client ID as well. So you need to make sure that you have, let me just open it. So you can see over here I have this true, and if I click on it, I hope this is the right one. Here, shopper context. So this is a scope that you're going to want to add in your client, in your SLAS private client. You need to ensure that you have the scope added so that you can browse using your shopper context. So basically how this works is that it sets your shopper context and it allows you to browse using a shopper context, and based on the time that you're setting and the customer group that you're setting, it's going to use this to browse the site kind of on the behalf of a shopper. That's it. That's all you need. If you're on the latest version, you don't need to do anything extra. However, if you're using a previous version of PWA Kit, you do need to make sure that you compare your site. There are a couple of files that you can get an idea of using the changelog. So if you're on a previous version and you don't want to upgrade, or you have tried upgrading the version only of your PWA kit, but you still aren't able to use the preview functionality, you do want to go and check the changelog to make sure that you have all of those files updated. All of those changes that are in the new extensible version available on your site so that you're able to use a preview functionality. So anyway, let's look at our preview functionality now. I'm going to open my page. So this is my page designer page. You can see it's the same as this. One disclaimer I do want to add here is that the preview functionality that works over here for page designer and the one that is working over here, these are different because we have a headless architecture. Whenever you're working with headless, you do need to be careful about certain aspects. So right now, because it's headless, your business manager is no longer in contact with your MRT, what you have deployed on MRT. So your business manager does not really know what you have on MRT. MRT basically gets this information from here, this page designer one, your PWA kit. It accesses this information, and then it's going to get all of that same, like it's going to get this, whatever tiles you have, it's going to get all of those configurations. If you have any sort of targeting, it's going to get all of that information, but for the styling, for the way that it shows over here, that you're going to have to do on the React side. So you're going to have to try to match the UI. And if you want to preview what the UI looks like, the best way to do it is using MRT's own preview functionality as opposed to using this one. So that's just a disclaimer because we do want to make sure that we have the front end and the styling configured on our PWA kit, and we're not expecting that this shows up the same way as we have on our page designer on Business Manager without having to do anything on React. So over here in our case, we have configured it already, and you can see that the styling is matching because we've basically just configured the styling to match the same way. The content itself comes directly from there. So if I change anything here, if I change this image, or if I change this image or anything, that is going to show up on my page designer preview. I'm going to show you big spenders, and I've added some targeting over here. So in the month of April and for big spenders, I've added 2 different components that are going to show up for those. I'm just showing it to you over here. So I'm going to show this to users in the month of April, and I'm going to show this to the customer group big spenders, and I want to preview this on the MRT. So I'm going to head over to MRT, open this, and let's set the date to any date in April, and let's preview this. There. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you can see that there is some difference with the UI, with the styling, and that's because I haven't really done anything on my React code for this. I just added it simply from the Business Manager. You can see that all of the content is coming the same way. So the text that I have over here, the image, everything is showing up the same way that I configured it on my page designer and Business Manager, but there is just a little bit of difference in the styling, right? So the positioning and the length and the size and everything, that is something that I can adjust easily from React. Now let's also set our customer group to big spenders. There you go. And for this one, you can see that I didn't have to do anything extra, and it's showing up pretty much the same way. Only this text is showing up in the middle, whereas it should be on the left. So these are the small adjustments that you can do from your React code, but you don't need to worry about the content itself. And you can see that everything, the targeting is working the way that it needs to work. All of the content is coming. You're getting the same products that you've configured from here, so you don't need to worry about any of that. But you do just need to make sure that your styling is reflecting what you want it to show. And you do want to make sure that when you're actually going live, you're not using this preview to envision what it would look like. You're using the MRT previews for a more accurate depiction of what your UI would look like. That's it from my end. That's it for today's episode. Please stay tuned for the next episode where we're going to look more into Scapy and Okapi APIs, and some common have some exercises where we just run a couple of APIs and explore what Salesforce has in their workspace. What are some test APIs that we can use to look at how the APIs function in MRT and PWA Kit. So I hope you guys benefited from this today. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that you stay tuned for the next episode as well. Thank you, and bye.